Thank you guys all for staying till the end. We're going to switch energy, right? This has all been about energy. And we're going to switch to a different type of energy, which is food. And what I love, I come from the nutrition world, and you come from the culinary chef perspective, is this is where a lot of the translation happens for people. And this is where, for many individuals, this will be one of the more intimate ways they experience all of the topics that the forum's been covering, right? Because a lot of things around the sustainability dialogue, it's like, we can eat less or we can shift behaviors, but everyone needs to eat. And especially when we ask people to stop eating one thing, in diet nutrition science, the question is always inevitably, well, if they're stopping that, what are they replacing it with? So really a great sort of closing to this forum. So thank you so much for being here. And I wonder if you could start by sharing the initiatives you have at the James Beard Foundation right now, which really sit at the intersection of a lot of the themes we've been talking about. If you could share that and help sort of paint the picture for the audience around how this is coming down to the plate, to the chef world, and to food.
Yes, absolutely. And so some of you might know the Foundation for the James Beard Awards, which is now a 35-year-old program. And actually, one of the 2025 America's Classics is right here in Ketchum. Pioneer Saloon is a recipient of a James Beard Award. So if you haven't gone yet, please visit them during your stay here. And so that's what we've known for. But about 13 years ago, we started a chef boot camp for policy and change to train chefs on using their voice, because they really operate at the intersection of consumers, media, lawmakers, suppliers, farmers, etc. So they play a really pivotal role in the food system, and their voice is so important. And it's also a fairly, for the farmers in the room, it's very similar. It's a fairly lonely world because you're operating your business. It's 16, 18-hour days. You don't really have time to collaborate a lot or interact a lot while being, and it's easy to think you're only one person, when in reality, you are the hundreds of people you employ, you are the thousands of people you feed every single year, and 163 million people dine out every single week. In 2024, the numbers were 58.5% of the dollar spent on food is spent on food away from home. Someone else is cooking the food that you're eating. So chefs really play this pivotal role. And so that's what we decided to harness at the foundation and really train them on doing that. And we've been building our impact work ever since. We do research, training, and advocacy. And last year, we launched a Climate Solutions for Restaurant Survival campaign to really recognize the fact that restaurants and chefs are key stakeholders in climate action because they're so deeply impacted by climate change. When there's floods, drought, fires, hurricanes, etc., that impacts what's growing in your fields. That impacts access to ingredients. That impacts when it's 100 degrees for 60 plus days in Texas in a row, a state where there's a lot of outdoor space in restaurants because on a good year, you can eat out a lot, right? That's impacting your customers. You end up with absolutely no one coming to lunch when it's 100 degrees, etc. So they're uniquely impacted in a way that's not really recognized as such. So we launched this campaign initially as an advocacy campaign to get chefs to advocate for putting IRA dollars permanently in the Farm Bill for conservation and climate smart agriculture programs. Obviously, we've shifted gear a little bit more recently to talk more about conservation and really thinking and on what legislation, what programs are possible to really keep that momentum and continue stressing the case of this economic impact. And the economic piece is really, really critical because when you're talking about that, when chefs are going in and saying, this is how I'm economically impacted, this is my revenue being down, the people I've had to lay off, the smaller amount I'm spending with my farmers, et cetera, that impacts the tax base of the lawmakers. And that means that they listen to that no matter in which states they are or in which cities, because it's an economic argument, it's bipartisan. And that's really, really crucial because we work with chefs in all 50 states.
Yeah, I love that, the food piece, as everyone needs to be eating. the agricultural sector. How do we find that language? You bring up a really great nuance, because we work on that a lot at Food and Planet, is the food story, how you frame storytelling, whether it's to impact Congress or invite someone to try a new ingredient. We're doing a whole campaign right now with seaweed. And it's, people respond differently if it was part of their food culture or it was not part of their food culture, if they live near a coast, what their context is. And chefs are such, like, even in the arc of my career, chefs have become rock stars, right? Farmers and chefs, total rock stars. We're always the ones like taking cookies away at Christmas time, getting like the finger wag, right? We're never like in that fun zone. But I have to imagine, Anne, that comes with a lot of stress for chefs because they don't just have to maybe go to culinary school and have a culinary point of view and maybe enter it because they're very passionate about food or sharing their cultural expression or a family story, whatever it may be. But now they've moved almost from, they need to be sustainability experts, they need to have these points of view, they need to make sure their supply chains line up. And now it's almost like they also need to be activists, as we were talking about last night. And how might we support them, or what would be helpful? And is that actually true, I guess, first? And if so, like, what can we do as diners, not just on that investment side or impact side, but just as diners to hold that space for them?
So I'll say it's true because that's the core of my dissertation, actually, the evolution of the chef from entrepreneur to entertainer to expert to advocate. And it is a huge amount of pressure. You open a restaurant because you want to feed people and you care about hospitality and about pleasure. And then suddenly you have all of these additional responsibilities. You have all these additional expectations, especially now. Diners want to go eat at places that match their values a lot, right? So there's a lot of external communication around that comes into play in the work of chefs. And chefs are pretty much the only CEOs who are also responsible for fixing the broken walk-in, for taking out the trash, for doing the dishes when someone doesn't show up. That's not something that you have to do. That's not something that I have to do, those kind of things. So how can we support them? There's so much information out there. And most of it is not written for chefs, or I would venture for farmers either. For people who have very little time to be understanding key messaging, need to obtain and retain some information to then share with their constituents. In the case of farmers, the chefs they might be working with, and in the case of chefs, they're diners. So how do we make it easier for them to understand what the issues are so that they can then communicate them effectively because they are such great communicators? So if you all don't necessarily want to be the ones communicating clearly to chefs, how can we at JBF help translate your work, your research, your data, your calls to action for a constituency that is enormous and that is really ready and primed for action and wants to be part of change and food system change? So that's one really key element. And then overall, how do we make these kind of gatherings and the kind of... There's a lot of talk about food system change. How do we involve people who are most directly impacted by it? I think that's really, really critical to make the whole process more collaborative. So as diners, it's also having these conversations with chefs who might be close to you in your communities, your favorite place. Ask them, what are some of the things is there something you really want to know about that you don't know about yet? How can I support you in that? In the communication you're putting out there, are there things you can do? I don't know that the world needs another podcast, to be honest, but what are some audio clips, some video clips, things like that are easily digestible for people to get key information? That's a huge help to help chefs then be the advocates, the experts that they are.
I love that. We've heard that a lot, that theme of like short, digestible, engaging storytelling content and education content too. That's a great vehicle. I love that. So you talked about the impact on climate, impact on ingredients. And when we were getting to know each other on our pre-call, you shared a really interesting story of cilantro.
Yes.
And a chef. And I'm sure everyone in this audience is familiar with that ingredient. So like how bringing that context, can you share
Sure.
that example and any others that you have to really paint that picture for people about these kinds of real impacts that chefs and diners and communities are feeling?
Yeah. So we do advocacy roundtables around the country, and we've been doing a lot of them around climate specifically, where we bring together chefs, farmers, federal lawmakers and their district representative, state lawmakers, city lawmakers, and local organizations also, to kind of create these hubs for action that can then live on after we've moved on from that particular city. And as part of that, we ask chefs to talk around the table about the impact that climate change has had on their restaurants, on their operation. And one thing to note is chefs are incredibly creative and very good at problem solving. So in general, they're going to find solutions. If an ingredient is not available, they'll use something else, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there that they're putting in. But there are some bigger questions that come around that. And that's where the cilantro root example comes into play. We did a roundtable in LA, and one of the chefs who participated is Thai. And cilantro root is a key ingredient in Thai curries. When the soil heats up, cilantro bolts before forming roots. So you suddenly no longer have access to this key ingredient for something that is so central to your cuisine and to your identity. So as a good problem solver, she started using green onions instead. You know, from a culinary technique perspective, texture, all that, it works. The flavor is different. So her customers are like, this doesn't taste like what I'm used to. So there's a communication piece there. You can explain that. But still, it's not the same. And for her, what also started happening is these big questions around who am I as a Thai immigrant, descendant of Thai immigrants, who is suddenly cooking my food with not the right ingredient? Am I still Thai? Do I still have a right to call myself a Thai chef in this kind of situation? And so these are the kind of impacts that we might not necessarily be thinking about. And you might be like, well, you know, is this really important when LA is burning, et cetera? It is, because if we're not feeling anchored and we're not feeling from a place at a time when there's so much destabilization everywhere, how do we make up for that? And how do we find the strength really to continue doing what we're doing with these little pieces that keep being chipped off of ourselves? So that's why it's an example that has really stuck with me so much. And I share it a lot because it usually sticks with people also.
Yeah. In the nutrition world, we're already seeing science around changes in nutrient density, in how much carbohydrate is in a grain versus, protein or phytochemicals. So it's already, their impacts are being measured and felt in both direct and indirect data, yes. Right? Like the head and the heart, which is so important. The other thing you and I were talking about last night, that you framed it in a way that I loved, which was false solutions. And I think in the food space, because there's such an emphasis on food as a solution, there's a lot of different attempts being made, a lot of different bets being made in different places, which is, maybe all well and good. But from your perspective, or the chef perspective, or the James Beard perspective, I'd love you to talk a little bit. What do you mean by false solutions, and how do you think about that? And can you share any examples as we think about food and climate and shifting behaviors, right? Like behavior change people are being asked to make.
I have a love-hate relationship with the tech world when it comes to food, because since restaurants and food is so appealing, I've encountered over the last 20 years so many people who want to hack the food system, hack restaurants, do all these things, but they're doing it strictly from the tech perspective and not from the food perspective, not understanding the realities of running a business, the realities of what it takes to put food on the table, what people might want in a dish. So that's there's a lot of these solutions that become very overwhelming for restaurateurs who have to, again, a chef owner of a restaurant or the restaurateur is the CEO, the chief marketing officer. They do absolutely everything. So when they're presented with tech solutions, they have to be very discerning as to what actually makes sense, what will actually solve issues for them, what will last, right? Not something that will be acquired in 6 months and it makes it even harder for them to then connect everything back to their other tech deck, all of that. So that's one piece. But on the ingredient side of it, there's also so much around, we were talking about that, the plant-based world and replacing fruits, vegetables, produce that is grown as part of a local ecosystem, right? A lot of the chefs that we work with on the independent restaurant side of it at the foundation work very closely with farmers. And I've talked about that with a couple of you. Still not enough farmers because it's hard to find each other when you're so busy in those worlds. So happy to talk with anyone who wants to help create better supply chains for small farmers and independent restaurants. But so these solutions that are plant-based because they're better for the planet or better for you, all these alternative proteins, alternative burgers, obviously that's a huge sector of consumer packaged goods for chefs. And that, for me, that's not a solution because it's displacing the capital away from farmers and putting it in places that have nothing to do and no connection to the local economies. A dollar spent in restaurants, I think 80 cents of it actually stays in the local economy when it's independent restaurants, not chains, because it goes back the linens laundered, the staff being paid, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're suddenly buying everything from companies that are located very far away with food that is not produced there, and that could be used instead where a chef could be making their own version of a protein burger, of a vegetable burger, using local products, that's really critical. And so that's what I mean by full solutions. These things that tend to say, well, that talk about innovation, but out of context in a way, and with no sense for anything local and cultural that has to do with, again, a sense of place that is so critical for our food system.
Yeah, I so appreciate that nuance because as well in the nutrition world, there's a lot of talk about plant-based, which has the wild west of definitions of what that means. And one of the real questions the health community is sitting with is what is plant-based and what is processed food? And we know from, actually it was a Seventh-day Adventist original study, one of the blue zones, if you've ever read that, that put plant-based on the map and plant-forward on the map. But that was, like you were saying, whole foods, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds. Yeah. So how this has been brought forward and everything you just said about where that asymmetrical investment is in was, I think, back to Justin Winter's slide that she had, I think it was day 2 on where the funding's going and real sort of agriculture, agroecology solutions, pasture land, animals in the system is a fraction of the investment of plant-based meats. So I as well would love to just hit that pause as we all have that intention of what are the solutions. I think there's some nuance in plant-based that from a health perspective, from a culinary and a chef perspective, is not quite as a silver bullet. To use an Idaho analogy that my dad was fond of, it's not a silver bullet here, we need silver buckshot. And plant-based meats might be one buckshot, but there need to be many, many tools that also focus on regional ecology and animals in the system. So I'd love to we still have a little bit of time, ask how chefs are thinking about that from that system with keeping animals in the system and on the plate, but maybe in different proportions. And so it's very plant forward and plant emphasis, and we have a lot of science around that for sustainability and health, but chefs have really helped lay that groundwork to normalize it for people. and have them discover how delicious it can be.
Exactly. I mean, that's a lot of the work I was doing at the Culinary Institute of America, actually. Around, I launched their Global Plant Forward conference. Amazing. And that was going back to ancestral cuisines that are plant forward, right? Where animal protein, and by the way, please say animal protein. That's my biggest soapbox. Don't just say protein and mean animal. Really distinguish, because there's protein in almost everything, right? That's really important to think about. So animals are critical to the ecosystem. We need them, right? We need to practice good rotational grazing, all these kind of things. And they're central. But instead of thinking of a massive steak, and I'm sorry because I'm saying this in Idaho, where there's delicious massive steaks, think of meat as more of a condiment and as a side ingredient on a plate that is rich with vegetables and grains. And this is where the culinary side and the nutrition side really come together in creating absolutely delicious solutions that are great for the planet, for people, and for profit.
Yes, and still lead with taste, because we know people want taste. They want to visually enjoy the experience with their eyes. And yes, when people, they have to love what they taste to open their ears, right?
Yes, and that's one thing that's always really central for us. We can do all of the advocacy we want. We can have all the chef advocates making all of the changes on their menus. If their food is not delicious, it doesn't work, because people will go to eat dinner once and never come back, right? So in order for them to be effective, the food does need to be delicious, and excellence on the plate is primordial.
Yes. Okay, so in our final 30 seconds, what is your ask of this audience? What is your call to action, whether as a diner or as in their sphere of impact in the work they're doing?
Yeah, so I've already given you a couple of to-dos, including, on the supply chain side and the communication piece. My last one is really, because you are all diners, be a good diner. And right now it means understanding the enormous pressures that the restaurant industry is under. Cost of ingredients have gone up. Wages have gone up, the cost of energy costs, including because of climate change. If you're having to turn on your air conditioning in North Carolina in March instead of May, the 3 to 5% profit margin that is typical in good years, and we haven't had these in a while for independent restaurants, that's completely eaten up by that. So you're seeing menu prices going up at your favorite places. Just know that chefs are making less money than they've ever made, and every restaurant is pretty much on the brink of closure on any given day right now. So if there's a place you love that you haven't gone to in a while, go there before it's too late. Support your local restaurants and understand that they're really, really working so hard to continue to please you under circumstances that are really challenging, and enjoy it and treat them very well.
Perfect wrap up before lunch. Thank you. Thank you very
so much, Kate.